Hi, welcome back to episode number 2 of the Tai Chi Code. In today's episode, we're going to examine all of the lessons that we can learn from the posture of single whip. We're going to learn how flexion of the hip can lift the body up and in fact lift the body forward when we're walking. We're also going to learn how rotation from the 3 elements of the core can result in straightforward projection of energy. Then we're going to learn how your movement can become blocked if you're not rotating with the proper sequence of movements, and how that can lead to improper walking technique and actually early wear and tear on your joints. Finally, I'm going to review multiple transitions from single whip that are going to allow you to see the different effects of combinations of rotation that we use and the 8 techniques of Tai Chi. As you're watching, if you're learning something new, particularly if you're learning something you've never learned anywhere else before, I want you to click the like button, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Before we get started, if you're trying to figure out how you can support this channel, you can either hit the join button and become a member, or better yet, go to the website linked below, Todd Martin MD, and sign up for either the walking code or the Tai Chi code, and that's going to help support me as I provide this information to you. Let's get started with single whip and the things that we can learn from it. But first we have to make sure we're in the right position for single whip. So let's practice this. This is the position. We have our left hand forward if we have our left foot forward. The left foot is going to be facing directly forward. The back foot is going to be facing out at about 45 degrees. My left hand is projecting with the palm straight forward. Right hand back at an angle about 45 degrees with a little bird's beak hand position. The weight should be shifted forward. So that's the visible position. Now let's talk about the invisible positioning of the core, because every movement we do is going to be dependent on how our core is rotating. Our upper part of the waist, our lower part of the waist, and our hip actions. So in the single whip position, we're going to have extension of our rear hip. So take your right leg, if the left leg is forward, and push it back against the ground. That is hip extension. That is the positioning of the hip. The positioning of the lower abs, or the lower abdominal muscle rotation, which rotate the lumbar spine, is going to be turning towards the forward leg. So when my left leg is forward, my lower abs are going to be turning counterclockwise. So we have extension of the right hip, the lower abs, or you can use your belly button as a stand-in for the lower abs. Turn your belly button all the way to the left towards that left leg. And then the rotation from the upper part of the waist is going to be turning back towards the rear leg. So imagine taking your upper torso for your rib cage and turning it clockwise. That's going to result in this positioning. Extension of the right hip, belly button or lower abs turning to the left, and upper abdominal muscles turning to the right. The result of that is going to be this position of single whip. You should feel your arms supported in this position if you've done it right. If you relax your arms, they should just stay in this position and not drop down. You can notice, because of my core positioning, if I drop my arms here, my shoulders are still hanging. It's an odd looking appearance here because my arms are not relaxed. I'd have to change my body positioning for the arms to actually drop down, keeping my shoulders where they should be in this down position and not hunched up. So if we have our core movement right, you should feel the arms really naturally hanging in this position. So now we have single whip. What can we learn from single whip? The first thing I'm going to demonstrate is how we lift the body up when we use flexion of the hip. You'll mostly hear from everybody out there that we have to always be pushing with our glutes. The glutes are what extend the hip behind us. So most people think of pushing with the glutes in order to lift the body up, or even when we're walking, you'll see videos telling you to make sure you're squeezing your glutes or pushing your glutes to make yourself move forward. But I think that is a mistaken view of how the movements are working, because people are not thinking about how the whole core is interacting. They're only thinking about the legs. So they assume if you're going forward and your legs going backwards, that must be glute activity. But all of our movements are in fact not just coming from the legs, they're being guided by all three elements of the core in combination. And only by looking at all three elements can you really understand what's going on in any particular movement. So from single whip, we have our core aligned with torsional rotation on the left side, meaning I'm turning clockwise with the upper torso, counterclockwise with the lower torso. In order to stand up, I'm going to use the core technique of lift. That's the walking code core technique. In Tai Chi, that corresponds to the 8 energy posture of press. So I'm going to use press from this position to stand up by flexing my left hip. And you can practice this nice and slowly. Pull yourself up by flexing your left hip. So I'm not raising the body by pushing against the ground. I'm raising the body by pulling. I'm going to take a look down here at what's going on so you can understand what's happening a little bit better. What's happening is I'm flexing my hip this way, so it's actually doing this sort of action, and at the same time I'm already engaging the lower abs on this side, which are tucking the pelvis this way. The combination of the forward flexion and then the tucking of the pelvis with the lower abs keeps the body vertical and triggers extension of the left knee. So I'm able to pull myself up by flexing the left hip. I'm not pushing down against the ground. So this, if I'm turning this way, is now the technique of press in Tai Chi or lift in the walking code. This is the same technique that we use to lift the body forward in a step. And so we can learn this here. If I am in single whip, what I'm going to do is take my right hip from extension and I'm going to flex it, pulling the right leg forward and releasing it from the ground. It should release very naturally because the root is controlled by the lower abdominal muscle rotation, so my right leg was not rooted to the ground. So as soon as I flex the hip, I pull forward. Now I can do the same lifting action that I did earlier, and it's going to lift the body forward. So that is how we're going to take a normal step. Practice this. Get in your position of single whip, extending the right hip. Now flex your right hip. That's going to allow your weight to shift forward. Now we are in the Tai Chi technique of split, or the walking code technique of set. From here, we're going to use our hip flexion to pull the body forward the same way that earlier you saw it pull the body up. The left knee is going to extend, left ankle is going to dorsiflex, continued torsional rotation on my left, and it's going to pull the body forward, and then I can begin walk with very good posture and very low impact on the joints. Now let's look at how we can use circular movement of the core to project forward energy. Most of the time when we're moving, it's very difficult to visually see that the body's rotating. When I'm walking forward, you can't see that my body is turning. The upper waist is turning like this as I walk. The lower waist is turning in the opposite direction as I walk. So my belly button now is turning to the left, now it's turning to the right, now it's turning to the left as we walk. It's twisting like this with every step, yet I'm walking in a forward direction. And then my hip energy is also rotational. If I push from my right hip, meaning my right glutes, I'm going to be turning my body to the left. If I flex from my right hip, I'm going to be turning my body to the right. So the combination of all three elements of the core and how they're rotating can project energy either in a circular path or in a forward path. And we can see this in single whip, because we're having an energy here that's projecting straight forward. Let me go back a couple positions, stepping out into single whip, shifting forward, and then finishing the motion here. When I step out in single whip, I'm going to be stepping out by flexing my left hip with torsional rotation on the left. So the same core waist energy that I'll have here, I'm going to have when I step out. Then I'm going to flex my right hip, pulling it forward, and that's going to shift the weight forward. And then I can still, right now, you can see my energy is slightly rotational because my hand is not projecting out, because I have flexing energy from my right hip, which is actually pulling the body around in this sort of clockwise circle as I shift forward. I'm going to project the energy straight forward now by extending my right hip, and it's going to change this energy to that energy. It's a very subtle movement, and we see people do this in Tai Chi demonstrations all the time, and it looks very nice, but if we don't know what is triggering the motion, then we're not really going to be performing it correctly. So we have to shift forward by pulling my right hip, and then we project straight forward energy out that way by extending the hip. Now let's talk about having your energy or movement blocked when you are trying to do your normal activities. It could be a Tai Chi activity, or it could just be walking. But what I want to do is focus on how this applies to your daily life. And so I'm going to look at how getting your energy or movement blocked when it comes to walking works because of how the core rotates. So I mentioned earlier that we could lift the body up from single whip. From this position, flex your left hip, pull your body up. And this would appear to be now a standing position, and somebody might think you could just simply walk forward with your right leg swinging forward from this position, since you're just standing up now. But what you'll find if you try to do that is you won't go anywhere. I can use as much force as possible trying to step forward, but I'm not going to step forward. I'm going to feel like my position is blocked. So why is that? Well, I've already demonstrated that the lifting motion that we did here is the same motion as we stepped forward when I first pulled my right leg forward, then lifted forward. That lift is the energy of core rotation that causes us to step forward. If we have already used that energy here, we've now found ourselves in a point of equilibrium, where full activation of these three elements of the core in that manner results in a lifting up, and this is where the movement stops. So I can't possibly use the same motion to step forward because the motion is already done. So if I think I can step forward from this position, I'm going to be mistaken. How this applies in walking, if I stand straight forward, when we are standing here, we are in a position of lift or press, either on my left side or my right side. And since I'm conscious of the core rotations, I can switch back and forth. But most people are not going to be aware what leg they're standing on or which hip is the active hip when they're standing. We just kind of stand because of body memory. So when we're standing with our press on the left, we can't step out with the right leg because we'll be blocked. There's nowhere to go because we've already used up the stepping energy. What we actually have to do is transfer the torsional rotation of the waist to the other side, then we can lift forward in a smooth walk. Why is this important for people's health? It's because so many people end up with incorrect walking patterns because as they're trying to just using their own subconscious body awareness, try to move and feel blocked, they find a dysfunctional way of getting past that blockage. And often that dysfunctional way is by leaning forward instead of rotating. If I'm rooted on the left with pressed left, instead of changing the rotation to the other side to step forward, what they do is now rotate forward from the left side and the right side at the same time, which causes the body to pitch forward, and that results in a pitch forward and a leaning walk. We start leaning and crashing into the ground. This leads to a very heavy heel strike when people walk. And that's one of the reasons why there's so many people out there right now who are claiming that heel strike with walking is incorrect. But that's because so many people are doing it incorrectly and causing a really heavy hit on the heel, reverberating stress and impact forces all the way up the body that can injure the knee, the hip, and the back. So if we want to walk correctly without that blockage, we have to understand where our weight is so we can transfer it and then walk fluidly. The final thing I want to demonstrate in this video is going to be several transitions from single whip. I think single whip is a great movement or posture because there are so many transitions we do from it that are well known in Tai Chi that are going to demonstrate the various 8 techniques that are available to us in our Tai Chi movement and in our daily lives. Beginning from single whip, we have our pluck energy. So in Tai Chi, this is the energy of pluck. Extension of the hip, torsional rotation on the side opposite the extending hip. That's pluck. This is reach in the walking code. I already demonstrated turning pluck or reach into split by flexing the right hip, and that is going to step us in a half step up by flexing the right hip and continuing the torsional rotation on the left. The half step happens because we have energy turning from the left upper torso, which is turning clockwise towards my right leg. That is projecting energy in a circle that's moving backwards, which does not allow my right leg to fully collect up to the side of the left leg. Let's do that again. Lift your right hip forward, trying to lift up, but continuing the torsional rotation, and you will end up with your half step here. We then transition, which I won't detail, but we can transition by shifting back, changing an empty stance, and then doing high pat on horse, which is a common transition coming out of single whip. I'm going to demonstrate another movement forward that we don't generally use in Tai Chi, that I'm aware of, coming out of single whip. Instead of using split, I'm going to use elbow strike. In elbow strike, we have flexion of the hip and concordant rotation, all turning away from the flexing hip, meaning if I'm flexing my right hip, the upper and lower torso are going to turn away from it, so counterclockwise in this situation. That's going to result in this. So now I have a full collection of the right leg because both the upper waist and the lower waist are turning away from the right leg, allowing all of that energy to pull forward. Again, it looks like I am standing in a straightforward position here, but I have combinations of rotation. Let me do this straightforward so you can see. As I step up, I have counterclockwise rotation from the upper waist and the lower waist. Why am I not appearing to turn? Because my right hip is flexing, so the right hip is actually applying a clockwise rotation to this motion. So it looks like everything is linear, when in fact it is all rotational. All right, now let's do another transition from single whip that we will use in Tai Chi. And that is going to be going from pluck, pushing forward in this direction, to pluck, going in the other direction. So I have changed my hip energy from extension of the right, and I'm changing it to extension of the left, and I'm changing my waist energy from torsion on the right, my waist energy from torsion on the left to torsion on the right. So now I have an extended right hip. I've changed my root or lower waist rotation to the right, and I am turning my upper waist to the left. That's going to produce this motion that we're going to use before going into wave hands like a cloud. Another transition we're going to do, changing the hip extension from right to left, changing the lower waist rotation from left to right, but we're also going to change the upper rotation from right to continuing right. So we're going to do this motion here, which is a full turnaround. In this transition I just showed, we're going to take our upper waist and turn it to the left. In this transition, I'm going to turn it to the right. So I've now turned all the way around, and we use this before stepping out to Fair Lady Works the Shuttle. I won't go into detail on this one, but we already showed how we can transition from pluck to press by flexing our left hip. I'm now going to show how we can go from pluck to retreat. Retreat is the walking code equivalent of rollback, by flexing my left hip and turning the upper torso towards the left, continuing the root on the left. So this is not a particular Tai Chi movement that we use in the form, but this is the energy of rollback. Flexion of the hip, waist rotation, all turning towards that hip, which causes a retreating action, which is why I call it retreat in the walking code. So we're going from here, flex your left hip, and turn your waist, upper part of the waist, towards the left. The lower part of the waist is already turning to the left. So we're going to actively turn the upper part of the waist to the left as we flex the hip, and we're going to get retreat or rollback. Practice that action. The difference between that and lift is only in the upper waist rotation. If I turn my upper part of the waist to the right, I get this, lift or press. If I turn the upper part of the waist to the left, I get this, retreat or rollback. Now we'll see the core technique of pulse, or the Tai Chi energy of ward off. We have torsional rotation on the left and extension of the left hip. All I need to do to change this to ward off is to change my lower waist rotation from left to right. And now I have extension of the right hip and both elements of the waist rotating towards that right hip. That's projecting energy off of the right hip. All three elements of energy turning back towards each other. My right hip is pushing off the ground, projecting the body forward. My right lower abs are turning backwards, projecting energy off the right hip and off the ground, which also projects the energy forward. And then finally, my left upper torso is going to turn towards that side, so also projecting energy off of the right lower abs and projecting energy off of the hip, which is projecting energy off of the ground, creating this powerful motion of ward-off, which you will not be able to break the arm trying to collapse it inwards, because we have all of this energy of the waist and hip and ground all expanding outwards. It's like if you're hitting a baseball, the ball is coming in towards the bat, which is going out this way, and the faster or more energy is coming in this way, the more energy is going to be projected out that way. And so that's what's happening with our core, except our core can't fly off like the baseball does, but the core is, in a sense, rotating towards this hip as it's pushing off, and so it's being thrown or projected outwards in a very powerful manner. One final transition I'll show. I already mentioned the transition to high pat on horse. That requires two different motions to shift the weight back. I can't just shift my weight back randomly, or I won't end up in the right position. I have to first shift back using split or set. So I'm going to turn the lower waist to the right, upper waist to the left as I shift back. So now my root is on the right leg. Now I can take the upper part of the waist, turn it to the right, and that's going to collect the weight into an empty stance here. Now I can project off using pluck again. Extension on the left hip, torsion on the right gives me pluck. So that energy here is the same as this energy here, just mirror images. Right hip extending with torsion on the left, left hip extending with torsion on the right. The next motion I want to describe coming from single whip is going to be this movement here that comes before raise hands and shoulder strike. In this movement, we're going to be using elbow strike to pivot. Elbow strike, flexion of my hip, waist rotation, both elements turning away from that hip. So I'm going to have flexing my left hip and turn the upper and lower torso to the right. It causes this pivot, a slight turning in of my left foot, opening of the hands. In this position, I am turning to the right with the upper torso, I'm turning to the right with the lower torso, and it's the hip that's giving me pulling energy going back in that direction. So that's why I didn't rotate as far as when I did pluck, or even farther when I did shoulder strike. I actually didn't mention that this energy is shoulder strike. Extension of the hip, upper and lower waist turning away from the extending hip. That is shoulder strike. So in this motion here, we have elbow strike, flexion of the hip, and then rotation away from that hip. That's the difference between elbow strike and shoulder strike. Hip flexion and elbow strike versus hip extension and shoulder strike. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to click the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. Support the channel by going to the website and signing up for the Walking Code online course or the Tai Chi Code. Or simply click the join button on YouTube and become a member. Thanks for watching.